Hi, thanks for sparing some more time to tune in here and watch my thoughts. It's just their own thoughts and nothing particular. So I just kind of give the way I think my thing, like I just give my opinion on certain things how I see them in the world and just move on. And today I want to look at this whole theory and the practicability of the word democracy, especially when I bring it to the African setting. Well, whereas democracy is such a beautiful thing that it shapes society, adds some values to society and how things should be done, and it helps make certain decisions, like, for example, who leads and what society wants and what should be done. It's just an amazing thing. As a matter of fact, brings about a lot of things like freedom of speech, expression, assembly, and brings about this whole thing of you have a right to choose who leads, and so on and so forth. You can go as far as you want. This whole human rights bubble, I love to call it a bubble, because human rights only exist if you are not, and just by thinking, if you're not against a certain set of values that have been put in a universal way. So if a certain set of values has been agreed upon universally, your opinion does not matter. In fact, if you just said your opinion, most of the times you're going to get a cancel culture, a new cancel culture, like, oh, that guy supports this and all these kind of things. But it's okay. But let me bring it home to East Africa. And this is a region that I understand so well, been to almost all the countries in East Africa. And every time I think about this democracy issue, actually, let me just say for Africa, it tends, for me, it just looks like it's one of those tools that's, pulls back development like far back than you would expect it to be. The country I am in, Uganda, has never had change of presidency. Change of presidency in terms of a peaceful transfer of power. From the time the British left, they left a king who was overthrown by a prime minister to become president, which is Milton Obote. He was also, overthrown by an army guy, Idi Amin, who was also overthrown by the Tanzanians, who installed another government that was overthrown has become overthrown, to a point that we had a president who only spent 3 months. So if you go back and test, but you see, the constitution was available, how a president should be elected and how this process should happen. Same applies to Kenya, same applies to Tanzania, same applies to DRC that has been in war forever. Go to Rwanda, where they've had another just whole episode of life, and until when Kagame came to power. But he has also stayed there more than 23 years. And the process of also changing leadership there is another thing. The constitution has been changed from 7 years to 5 years, to that kind of going back, and every time a constitution has to be tampered with in order to favor whoever wants to be in power. Same in Kenya, where a constitution had to be changed after what happened, mass demonstrations and killings of people, and all this thing. Go to Sudan, where there's a constitution on how a president has to be elected until a country has been divided into two, giving birth to the youngest, I think, nation in the world today, which is South Sudan, which has also failed to go through democratic systems. But even the North felt like the president is overstanding for leadership and all this thing, and there's poverty, there's a lot of that is looming. So he has to go, and then the demonstrations happen. He has left power. The military takes over. That also talks about a democratic transition that has never happened, and now people are back in the streets of protest. You can go on and forth. But I went back and observed some of the countries that have not had or have not practiced democratic processes in terms of electing who leads them at the top. Mostly Arab countries. Mostly. We can also look at other countries that have had one leader for quite a long time, and they are democratic. We can question their democratic systems and look at them, examine them quite well, and see how long these leaders have been in power and what has been done and how have they been making these decisions. And you will realize that most countries led by, like Arab countries, that had one leader for a very long time, that don't have a particular way of how we can change the president. Morocco and well, Tunisia recently until it changed the presidency, but who is also becoming a problem. Probably they know better their politics. I don't want to preempt their politics right now because they're going through quite a hard time, and the blacks who are in Tunisia right now facing evictions from places, their campings, in terms of probably demonstrating and fearing for their lives, that they'll be killed because the president mentioned something against the blacks. And this whole thing is just funny. But let's concentrate on the countries that have had one leader for a very, very, very long time. And when those countries do not have democratic practices that happen in them, like Uganda, where you have an election after every 5 years, and then you have an election that happens after every 5 years as well in Tanzania and in Kenya. But also the system on how it is ruled matters. And I've concluded one thing, that democracy for Africa is not a reality in the 21st century. And in fact, that Africa does not need democratic processes in this 21st century. Because every time we look at other countries and benchmark on them, you look at Britain, you want to benchmark on Britain, you want to look at Italy, you want to look at Germany, you want to look at France, USA, and all these amazing countries, Japan and all, and you want to go through their democracy systems, you end up realizing that from centuries, way back, like 100, 200 years and 300 years, these guys were at a certain level of development. They were working on their systems. They had their own tyranny, anarchies, and all those things happening. All the bad things were happening in their country, in their respective countries. And that it took a process to realize what they have now. Because if America's democracy is 100 years plus, and other countries that have long, the democracies have stood for a very long time, it means that over time they have mastered the art on how to work, and what they discovered at that time has worked for them till today. And those countries over time drew long-term plans. I'll give an example of China. If you read about the 100 years plan of China, you realize that even the presidents that came in after, it looked like they had one thing in their mind: how do we become the superpower at a certain, by I think 20 something. Okay, but I know some years ahead. So they had a vision to become a world superpower, and they have done that gradually. And I can assure you that over time, they'll be the most powerful country in the world. Just look at that. The same as the Soviet Union, of course, before it broke into Russia, and Russia became what it is. But all of them have always had one thing in mind: how do I become the most powerful nation by this time? It means that even when the leadership changes, they all have one goal: how do I become that one thing? Because that's the vision of the country. When you come to African countries, none of them has a vision for the country. They just don't have it. All you hear is the vision of a party, a political party that is in power. RPF, NRM, Chama cha Mapinduzi, come to Kenya, where then they just keep switching alliances from one party to another. I don't even think they have a steady party that has been around for quite a long time. They just keep changing. Azimio la Moja, Kenya Kwanza, and all these things. They keep changing. But in fact, I believe that even in the next cycle, they'll have another party come into power. But same people, they just change the teams and play their own political game. Now, you realize that the vision stands with a party, not with a country. Okay? And that means that if a country in power leaves, most times by force, and they don't embrace defeat, the incoming government tends to change everything. They want to dissociate themselves from the past government, and because they believe that they now have the vision of the country, they start to put things together. You literally have to start from a new slate every single time a president changes. Every single time you have to start from a new slate. Every time I look at where Saudi Arabia was in 1980 and where Uganda was in 1980, it looked like they were the same level. Today, it's miles apart. What do they have in Saudi Arabia? They have a monarchy. And this monarchy decides on what happens with the country. Let's build this, let's build that, and it happens. So they literally just put up what, statements like God made, let there be this, and it happens. Let there be this, and it will happen. No one goes against those rules. Gaddafi did the same. He put Libya right at the top. Libya became one of the richest countries, in fact, the richest country in Africa, and started to help other different countries building their schools, housing projects, mosques. And if you've studied Libya, you will know what it did for other African countries. I can't speak of what happened to it, but anyway, that will be another conversation one day when I'm in the right mind to speak about what happened to Libya. But yeah, but they had one leader for 42 years and drove that country to that direction. He had a vision for Africa that other African leaders did not see, did not want to believe in, because they thought that it takes away their power, it undermines their power, and that's how people look at things. Now, every time you have this kind of thought of our leaders not having a vision for a country, and a plan on how to achieve that vision, democracy becomes useless. Because every time democracy comes in place, it's about, we don't like you, you're in seat, you're corrupt, you do this, and so you must leave power. And then when I come with a whole new field of players who are put in different places, and we have a new team. All of a sudden, we just have a new team happening. And it's a try and error. And then when things don't work out after 2 years, the people come back and say, no, you're not performing, get out of here. And we bring another person. They bring another person. And they don't have that mindset of, can we kind of start from where, embrace the good things that the past government did, and let's build on this past and make it better. If they had 25,000 roads, can we, and the vision was to build a road network of 40,000 kilometers, that vision is killed instantly the moment leadership changes. And this person's vision, instead of 40,000 kilometers of road, is going to focus on, let's ignore the roads and let's build a rail network. The roads are equally important as the rail network. So you go for the rail network. But before you finish construction of the rail network connecting the whole of probably East Africa or Africa, another guy is going to say, you're wasting money. Why are you building the rail lines? We need to build, in fact, what is very important is to buy planes. And let's focus on air transport. And they abandon these projects. They stay there and they collapse eventually after years. They are done. There's nothing. So I think countries lack a vision. They lack a plan to execute those visions. Of course, without a vision, you don't have a plan. And that's why I tend to think like democracy is just not necessary. If one guy decides that I am going to rule, okay, if we are to embrace democracy, I have pretty good suggestions. Can we have long terms? Instead of 5-year term plan, can we just have a president rules for one term that is 10 years? So we know this guy has taken us for 10 years. He has delivered on his vision for 10 years, or the country's vision is become or attain a GDP of maybe $100 million and $100 billion. But on the $100 billion in the end of 10 years, probably he's at $70 billion. Then that means that the next government just has $30 billion to attain the $100 billion of GDP by 10 years. Okay? That would be a very smart way. Instead of having 5 years, because this is what happens in 5 years. The president is elected, and in the first 5 years, he's selecting government, he's putting together, a parliament is organizing themselves to get a speaker, you're putting together the MPs, you're changing the PSs, the whole system. That takes like a whole 1 year to put together a team that is going to start working and also removing what was not working and trying to fix who is going to do what that is going to be happening and correcting the mistakes of the past, trying to make things better. In the second year, it's like, now let's start working. Okay? By third year, guess what is happening? They start to think about year 5 of, wait a minute. Even the members of parliament, the president, they start to go back to the ground rule, kind of people please in preparation for the 5th year. and it's happening in the third year. And then in the fourth year, they just stop working because then they start campaigning because at the end of fifth year, they should have elected a new government, new members of parliament who are coming in power. So they literally have 1 year to kind of work. And in that 1 year is full of chaos most of the times. There's court petitions, there's protests on the streets. We were cheated. Just look at what's happening in Kenya. Since they elected a new president last year, here we are. The guys who lost the Raila Odingas are on the street calling for demonstrations because they think that the elections was not fair and that they should be, involved in, selecting the members who have to be on the Electoral Commission board. Then there's this thing of, you have to open up the servers and we know what actually happened to the elections and how the president won. It's quite difficult for someone to accept defeat, especially if you lost by a very small margin. 200,000 votes is quite very small, but very a lot, depending on which side of the coin you look at. Now, I feel like the government of Kenya is going to spend 2 years in chaos. And then by the third year, you want to start working and then you start thinking of another election. At the end of the day, Kenya will remain right where they are. And when you start to evaluate the president's work at the end of 5-year term, 1 year term or 5 years, he's done nothing. If he has done anything, it will be this small. So how about just say we have 10 years, one block term, 10. You're going to become a president for the next 10 years, battle out all your issues by third year, and work for the 7 years to achieve the dream of the country. For me, that would be democracy, because then we are working towards one goal. This whole crap about we have to elect, we have to demonstrate, and the country just goes back behind. Anyway, that's just my thought. I don't know what you think about democracy, but I think that we just need one leader handed over a vision for some time. 10 years, if we are to do democracy, straight 10 years, because at the end of the day, he still rules 1 term for 5 years, goes back election, then comes back another 5 years, and then becomes 10 years, but in the 10 years full of chaos after every 2 years. It doesn't make sense. So yeah, how about that?